familiars. This is Matt Orozco here from Macabre Daily, and I am joined today by the writer and director of the upcoming Helloween film. We have Phil Claydon with us. And for those that are wondering, you can watch Helloween on VOD coming this month on the 29th of September from Miracle Media. And if you're someone like myself who encourages the purchase of physical media so you can hold on to it, watch it whatever the hell you want, no matter who has it available. It'll be out from 101 Films on October 13th. So, Phil, it's a pleasure to have you with us today, and thanks for taking some time to talk about Helloween.
Matt, great to be here. Thanks for inviting me on. I'm excited.
One of my questions, you probably get a question quite a bit of what are your inspirations? I could tell by some of the things around you. Jaws is definitely one of them. But when you think back to like your earlier Phil, young Phil, what were the horror movies, including Jaws, that really inspired you to want to become a filmmaker?
Yeah, obviously, the first thing that inspired me to become a filmmaker, I was 4 years of age and went to Odeon in Brighton and saw The Empire Strikes Back. Didn't have a clue what was going on because I'd never seen the first one, but as a kid, it was like I didn't want that experience to end. That's why I became a filmmaker, because it was like I just want to keep being in a dark auditorium with a story and being transported to different worlds. Luckily, grew up in a VHS era. So from that, cut to me going into, parents suddenly got this big VCR top loader and going to a video store for the first time, which is not like your shelves behind you, just like wall to wall of all these kind of like big cases with these amazing images on the front. And obviously I was drawn naturally to the images of horror movies because they just always had great artwork.
Yeah.
And I was very lucky at that age because I think my parents were just so happy to have the technology. They didn't really know what was what, so it was kind of like, it was, I remember one of our first rentals was Poltergeist because it's a Steven Spielberg production and he'd done Raiders of the Lost Ark and Jaws, so it's got to be
Right.
fantastic, right? So we watched that in an afternoon. I loved watching that. I loved American Werewolf in London, I think was next on the list, you know what I mean? It's just Evil Dead. It just, I went through all the video nasties, just anything that had a cool front cover, I was watching it. My first experience into John Carpenter was watching The Fog. It was I was allowed to stay up late one night because it was on BBC, and I was absolutely petrified, so petrified that any time it came on TV that I had to watch it again because it was just like the feeling of being scared was brilliant. It was just like I'm
Yes.
into a film with a contract that I know that I'm going to be on the edge of my seat, petrified, and that was the fun for me. I think horror really just allowed me to jump into these amazing worlds where I had this visceral feeling as well, and that's what
Yeah.
I loved about it. Not only was I inside a Nightmare on Elm Street of like these dreams going, oh my God, I've been running up the stairs where my feet have got trapped and I can't run. You know what I mean? It was just like everything that happened in a horror movie was just cinematically so much fun. And it just kind of like infused me. So I'd consume all of John Carpenter, I'd consume all of Sam Raimi, I'd consume, Stuart Gordon stuff that came out with From Beyond and all that kind of stuff. It was just, it was a great time to be alive. There was so much to watch, and so much to be excited by, and there was so much practical gore effects and stuff. It was phenomenal.
Yeah, I tried to avoid the whole, us versus them generational discussions around who had it the best, when it comes to growing up. But I
Yeah,
think there's something to be said about, folks that were able to live in a time where you could go to the video store, your selection was limited to whatever the store had available, not just what they'd carry, but also what was still available for you to actually rent that someone hadn't already checked out. And the experience of not having this wealth of information to inform your viewing decision, which ends up leading to sometimes finding some complete hidden gems. Like I remember when I first rented Phantasm, I had no idea what I was getting into. Now it's one of my favorite movies of all time. But it's the kind of thing if I would have read a synopsis beforehand or like heard some reviews, people that didn't maybe like it or maybe didn't appreciate it the same way, that might have colored my interpretation of the film in a way that maybe even would have prevented me from seeing it. So I think that kind of almost blissful ignorance we had going into the VHS era is something that I think we try and latch onto again in the digital days, but it's a little bit more difficult. But I think that's where independent horror comes in. Folks like yourselves who are creating things that, you know, pushing against the grain, trying to do something different. And when you think about, your inspirations for the story of Helloween, it definitely feels like kind of your love of horror shines through in many different ways. But I'm curious to know, where did the initial idea, foundation for it come from?
yeah. The initial idea was that kind of came together with two things. It was Jonathan Softcott texted me, said, would I be interested in making, directing a micro budget horror? And he took a gamble, and I said, yeah, sure. And they had another idea set up that they wanted me to direct. So I read that script, and I was going, well, we could do something with this. But that kind of like fell by the wayside for different reasons. But I think the financier still wanted to make a horror movie. And there was a remit, and it was like, I want to do a clown movie set at Helloween. That was the remit from the financier, because obviously I think, they do their research with distributors and what's selling and all that kind of stuff. So it's like, okay, horror movie, clown, set at Halloween. It's super low budget, so we maximum 2 locations. So that was kind of like my parameters. So my brain went to 2016 creepy clown sightings. You remember, and they were big over in America. I got a lot of YouTube videos. They were also big over here, and it was like infecting the world. I think even the Russian embassy over here was just like, beware people with clowns. It was saying to their citizens of Russia, beware people with clowns. You know what I mean? There was actual warnings coming out. And I was going, this is amazing. And my brain went to kind of like, V for Vendetta, and that idea of the fact that an idea can be dangerous and, filtered out for a mass of people that could create an uprising. And I was like, well, what if there was something sinister behind this whole clown thing? What if there was a mind behind it? What if there was kind of like it's a Charles Manson style cult? I mean, just all these like what if ideas were flowing through my brain. And that was the jumping off point. And I was going, right, I can't make a sort of Mad Max post-apocalyptic crazy crowns on the rampage during Halloween, killing loads of people because Trick or Treat's gone into a bloodbath. That would be a great idea. We'll leave that for a sequel. But I can do a Purge style, first Purge, internal contained movie, which feels big. And that's what you got to do with these kind of movies. You got to have a big idea. That's what I love about Larry Cohen. He always had a high concept, but didn't have much resources. But the high concept was what made it kind of interesting and exciting. And, micro budget isn't kind of like, it's not a limitation. It's just inspires creativity. So I was like, okay, the story is then going to be about whoever is the mastermind behind this uprising of clowns who are all wearing the same makeup. So I need to invent a new horror character. And that's kind of like I was thinking about, cult leaders like Charles Manson. I was thinking about V for Vendetta, and I was thinking about all these people that are kind of like in the shadows to become the voice piece for kind of like the unheard people. Right. And that's where Carl Kane came from. It's kind of like, okay, yeah, he's a clown. He started off as a product of a system where he was in foster care, and they threw him by the wayside and became a tick box, and no one looked after him, and he's angry at the system, and then goes on a rampage. So that's the opening, which is a doff of the cap and homage to John Carpenter's Halloween, and then we can jump forward 20 years where technically from inside he's been masterminding this kind of uprising. And so that was the inspiration. That's where the film came about, and that's what I had to write.
I mean, I think it's so interesting for folks to hear this because, I think there's a prevailing assumption sometimes, especially when it comes to the business of film, that, creators have a lot more control over things than they do. But and there is to some extent, right? You can influence to, the way the story's told, within your budget parameters and your cast. There's a lot of flexibility, but at the same time, I think there's not an appreciation for understanding that, sometimes we have to meet certain criteria for the finance side to be able to want to move forward. And how do you create within a space where you are already kind of given the brief, but you have to fill in all of the important details. And I think that's so fascinating to hear kind of your perception of it again, because I think folks will watch this and say, I could pick up this from that, this from there, but it comes together in a very unique way that, again, isn't going to ring familiar, which I think brings in my next question is that I think it's almost inevitable for a lot of horror fans will start to compare things fairly or unfairly. Like it's just way people out where our brains are wired to make connection. When you think about your film, Halloween in particular, there's going to be this natural desire for people to want to lump it in the category of, oh, there's a clown, so it must be like It or Terrifier, or, oh, it's a slasher, it must be like Halloween or this. Do you feel that those comparisons are helpful, more harmful, or somewhere in the middle? Like, what are your thoughts on when people try and kind of take what you've created and maybe apply it to something that came before it?
Yeah, so it's our natural instinct, has it, in terms of being fans of stuff. And I don't have a problem with it. I think sometimes you have a lot of kind of like, you can see bad energy. It's just like, oh my god, we don't need another clown. We got art. Why do you want to? It's like no movie is made to directly rip anything off, and Helloween came from a place of just gut instinct to make a really cool Halloween film. You know what I mean? I wanted, like you were set up to do a Christmas movie. It's like I was setting up to do something where I want to make the films I want to watch on a Friday and Saturday night. So it's
Right.
like my gut instinct tells me, it's like in my parameters that I got, how can I make this the sort of thing that would end up, say, on your sort of one to watch for Halloween lists? And I think sometimes it is it's a compliment to be, put into that conversation. Who wouldn't want to be put in a conversation of Art the Clown and the Terrifier movies, which I love, but the one thing that I feel is people would be let down because if you're going in, it's that thing where you rented a movie because I remember I rented Fright Night because it was like, this film's scarier than A Nightmare on Elm Street. That was the slogan. And you said, oh my God, Nightmare on Elm Street is so scary. And I'm watching Fright Night and I didn't not enjoy, I love Fright Night, but it wasn't, it's funny,
It's
isn't
more
it?
funny.
It's like
Yeah.
a fun movie. It's not like scary as hell like Freddy Krueger and Nightmare on Elm Street. So in the horror, watching horror films and sort of being compared to something else doesn't mean you're not going to enjoy it less. I think if you go with an expectation of like, I want to see bodily dismemberment in a real fun way for an extended amount of time, Halloween disappoint because the expectation will not be met, because Halloween comes from a place of it was shot in 9 days, and I came from a place of Halloween and the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which was kind of, they're bloodless films, they
Yeah.
did. Myers in the first Halloween, there's a lot of kills, but there's minimal kind of blood spray or anything. It's built on suspense, terror, what the mind can fill in, and that's how Halloween operates. Because I know how long it takes to do all that practical stuff. We just didn't have the time to do it as much as like my brain would come up with crazy ways. I had to go the opposite way because, like we just talked about, the parameters of production will not allow you to do that. But back to the question on. Fans, it's as horror fans, we're naturally going to put things together. We're naturally going to compare stuff, and then it has to be seen. People will make their own opinion on whether it kind of like, did it entertain them? Did it scare them? Did they find Carl Kane a kind of interesting, cool character, a scary character? And those sort of things are kind of out of your hands, because that's what you make a movie, and this is what I like, who wants, you want to make a film to be part of a conversation, whether that becomes kind of like a negative thing or a positive thing. And I think in the horror community, it's the part of the conversation. So that's what excites me.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, I love your perspective on that too, because I think, it's so easy to kind of be general and say, oh, all comparison's bad or comparison's great, right? But there is nuance to it. And I think that you're absolutely right that if we go into this with an expectation that is not promised to us by the film that we're going to see, one that we create on our own because of our own desire to want to connect it to something else. We're almost getting in our own way of the enjoyment of something because we're not giving the film a chance to succeed on its merits, as opposed to giving it this sense of requirement that it has to meet that wasn't the intention, maybe not supposed to be. And, this is your third feature. As a filmmaker, what are the things that you think you've grown? How do you think you've grown coming from your first feature and the shorts you've done all the way now to Halloween?
I think we've go through from my first film alone, which was kind of like already set up and it had a script, and I was allowed to do some bits and bobs to change it around, to doing Lesbian Vampire Killers, which came on as a director, but loved the material and had a hand on kind of like doing some rewrites, but the script was already there and it was just real fun. And then for me, this is the first time where I've been allowed to write something, even though I'd written in the remit. I've written, like we said before, this industry is interested. Every film that I got to make came about because I went in with a film I wanted to make. But I never ended up making the film I wanted to make. I went in with a thing called Dark Corners, which was a horror film, and David Boyle was like, we love this, we love your shorts, here's the film we're making. Do you fancy, you know what I mean? So then
Right.
you're alone, because the opportunity from going for the relationship was formed from, that's a great piece of work, that's a great script, but we can't make that right now because we're on a roll with this. Lesbian Vampire Killers was the same. I was pushing two other scripts I'd written. I'd written Rebel Riding Hood, and I'd written a thing called Zombie Island, and we were pushing those with the sales agent, and we couldn't get the financing together. And we were pushing Lesbian Vampire Killers at the same time. And then Lesbian Vampire Killers suddenly became kind of like a film that people wanted to make, and they were going, well, we should switch hats and do Lesbian Vampire Killers. So again, you were pushing two other projects, ended up making that. Within was a similar thing with New Line. They wanted me to make, they were trying to find me a comedy project because of lesbian vampire killers, and I sat down with them and going, well, but I love horror movies, and they were like, we didn't fucking know. You know what I mean? They were just like, this is what we want to make. Again, it was like, oh, well, I've got some scripts you want to read. No, this is what we want to make. So that was the Within experience. Well, this was the first time where it was just like, okay, Phil, you got to go and write a script. Okay, it's in the remit of this, but it was kind of like your own thing, and going from kind of like a budget of sort of £1 million. The first one, it was like $5 million lesbian vampire and $5 million for Within, and going from that then dropping down to a micro budget. It's the same filmmaking instincts, you know what I mean? You just
Right.
work into the parameters of what you got, whether you got kind of like all the resources, which is still limited because it's a low budget, or whether you've got really limited resources, you just figure out the best way to make the best version of entertainment. Because, as I always say, the audience doesn't really care too much about the budget. They want to know, am I entertained? How have you
Exactly.
executed it? How have you done this? You're not standing, Phil, you're not in front of the film going, oh, we didn't have this on this day, and we didn't have that, and we didn't have the amount of money to do it. Please forgive me. It's like, I don't give a shit. It's like, no, entertain me. You know what I mean? I don't care if you've got £1 or £100, entertain me. So that's your remit. So you've got to do whatever you can to get your thing in that letterbox to create an entertaining, engaging, gripping story. And that's what it's about.
Yeah, and I love that you put it into, I mean, you're absolutely right that people will not think about these things, or at least the average film goer is not sitting there thinking, I'm going to give this one a little bit more credit because it was a smaller budget versus a one that's got all of the resources. So I think that, meeting your audience halfway by saying, like, if we can agree that the point is entertainment, and that's the remit, that's what we're supposed to be doing, no matter what the resources are, then I
Yeah.
think that ultimately dictates what the final product is. And my last question for you, Phil, is kind of a fun one. If you were asked to program a double feature with Helloween, what do you think would make a really fun companion film to see it in the theater with?
I'd love to see Halloween doubled up with Trick or Treat, the Michael Dougherty film. I love that. Just the worlds are the same. I mean, most people would be like, why don't you put it up with John Carpenter's Halloween? And it's just like, but you want that kind of compare and contrast, and also like the universe that both exist in. They both look and feel like I'm out trick
Yeah.
or treat. I love Halloween, and John Carpenter's Halloween is a fantastic movie, but it's also that kind of like vibe of something that feels like a Christmas movie has to feel like Home Alone, and I think a Halloween movie has to have that. Even Sleepy Hollow has that same thing. It feels like a Halloween movie. There's
Yeah.
just something about the imagery. There's a Even though they're trying to scare you and we're trying to scare you, there's a warmth and there's a fun nature to it. Like I say, I call it R-rated ambling because it's just like you're not going to be complete. You're not going to be traumatized like Eden Lake. You are going to have fun. You'll be able to get some popcorn. You'll be able to get your mates, and you can be able to go, right, here's our contract with each other. You got to scare me, okay, and just see how that plays out. For a short time, 80 minutes.
Well, I think you're right about not pairing it up with Halloween because it was going to be called the Babysitter Murders, right? So the whole idea that it was taking place on Halloween is almost irrelevant to the original intent, which I think shows through the film, right? It does, there's a few jack-o'-lanterns peppered throughout, but on the
Yeah.
whole, it does feel like any other day this could have happened and taken place. And Phil, I just want to say thank you so much for taking some time to chat with me about the film. Wish you all the congratulations on the release of it. I know how much work goes into making these things. It's not easy. It's a team effort. So kudos to you and your team on putting this out there. And to remind everyone to go and see Halloween when it comes out on VOD this month on the 29th. And if you're like me, again, collecting your physical media, you could pick up a copy from 101 Films on the 13th of October. But Phil, it's been a pleasure and look forward to speaking with you in the next film you got coming out.
Matt, it's been awesome. I wish we could have spoken for longer. You know what I mean?
I know these conversations always feel like they could go on much longer than they actually do. But
Yeah.
when the press dust is settled, you've always got a home to come back and talk horror here at Macabre Daily. So we're always
I'd
happy to
love
have
to
you.
do that. Yeah, just have a longer horror chat.
We can do that, Phil. You've got it, and we'll make it happen.
Okay, cool. I'm in. Let's do that.